All right, Parshas Bo. Boro Paro, Kenny Hikbadati is Libo, Veslave Avadav, Laman Shisi Osapayela Bikirbo, Laman Tesapir Bosne Bincha Ben Bincha Esa Cheirus Halalti Bimitzrayim. In order that you should tell the your children and your children's children, your grandchildren, how how I made a mockery of Egypt and my signs that I placed among them. So, and the emphasis, it's interesting here. It says there's an emphasis here. Ba'azne bincha ben bincha. It seems the simple reading is that the simple reading is that you, even after you tell your children about it, the Torah is emphasizing you did not yet fulfill your obligation until you tell your grandchildren also. No, a person could say after a number of years, I already fulfilled my obligation. I told my children about it. My children can then tell my grandchildren. So it seems that the Torah here is emphasizing that a person has an obligation not just to tell his children, but future generations as well. Now, the question is, why is there this special emphasis, not just on Bincha and your sons, but on Ben Bincha as well? Now, my uncle, not that in the that I'm not aware that he said it in regard to this, but he said in explaining the Haggadah, this was a major theme of his, that the mitzvah of the Haggadah, Pesach night, of telling about the Exodus from Yetzias Mitzrayim, is a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. It's a special mitzvah of learning Torah. As a matter of fact, he said that before we mention Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah, corresponding with 4 different types of children. So the Torah talks, the Ben Chacham, the wise son, the Ben Rasha, the rebellious son, the Tam, and the Sheni Yodei Lishol, the son who just is not in a position to ask questions, who you have to somehow initiate him in the process. So we say Baruch HaMakom, blessed Makom is God. Baruch Hu, blessed is He. Baruch Shenasan Torah L'Amo Yisrael, blessed is the one who gave the Torah to Klal Yisrael. What's the idea? The idea is that it's a mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and we emphasize that point by saying a Birchas HaTorah. We know that we say a Birchas HaTorah every morning. It's on the learning of Torah, during the day, whether it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, or it's a mitzvah, a bracha on the act of learning, or the chefts of Torah, as Rabbi Chaim would say. Whatever it is, there is an idea of behind it is that Talmud Torah requires a bracha. Could perhaps be suggested that the purpose of Talmud Torah requiring a bracha is, in a sense, to connect the learning of Torah as an experience of feeling close to God. So we make a bracha on it. But whatever it is, Talmud Torah requires a bracha. And sometimes specific acts of Talmud Torah require a bracha. Let's say somebody gets an aliyah, goes up to the Torah, so he recites a bracha. So here too, either through custom or through halacha, in order to identify the teaching recitation of the Haggadah, we couple it with the Birchas Torah. And especially, while it's certainly true that part of the mitzvah of Haggadah is teaching Torah, but I would phrase it a little different, in a more general way. I think that the mitzvah of the Haggadah, besides the perpetuation of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of Zikaron Yetzias Mitzrayim for generations, but it's, in a sense, it's a form of chinuch. And Talmud Torah, I see primarily as a vehicle of intellectual advancement or perpetuation of the study of Torah. But I think that the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is more than just that. Now, it's interesting. We say Baruch Hamakom, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenastan Tarloi Amo Yisrael, Baruch Hu. Blessed is Makom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is called Makom. Blessed is He. Baruch Shenastan Tarloi Am Yisrael. Blessed is the one who gave the Torah to Klal Yisrael. I think that this expression that the Haggadah employs, a Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, really is expressive of two approaches to the Haggadah. And depending on one's situation, both approaches have to be used. Hamakom, why is God called Makom? God is called Makom because Hu Mikomo Shalom. He is the place of the world. There were many among the Mekubalim. There were many different understandings of this concept that He is the place of the world. It's true. When you deal with the question of the Ben Chacham, when we deal with the Ben Chacham, so the Ben Chacham asked the question, Mo'edos v'achukim v'amishpatim asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu eschem. So the question primarily is a question, an intellectual question. It was acquisition of knowledge. In the fullest sense, you tell them the laws of Pesach, and the way many explain it, you teach him the Mishnayos, the Gemara, Psachim. Of course, you have to convey the Avodim Hayinu as well. But that also is taught perhaps with an intellectual perspective. But sometimes you have to deal with the question of the Tom, the Shena Yodei Lisho, Apsaklo. He doesn't even know how to initiate. You have to encourage him to initiate. And this is the concept of Chanoch Lenar al Pidarko. Chinuch doesn't always manifest itself in an intellectual study. But it gives, each child is different. There was a lady, husband and wife, who lived here in Chicago years ago. And they had two children who were affected, unfortunately, with mental handicaps. My father was close with them. He tried to help them out. Sometimes members of the community, especially at that time, were not sensitive to their situation. And the younger child, who has passed away since, the parents passed away, was severely retarded. He couldn't talk. His communication was very limited. He didn't understand. Sometimes they had to take steps to almost like tying his hands that he shouldn't do harm to himself. And they kept him in the house. And in those days, the institutions, not that they're all so great today, but was terrible. I used to hear stories, even as a young boy, about parents who had to put their children, and they did it because they felt that it was in the interest of their children in institutions. And then they would come to visit their children, and they would find that their children had marks on them, that they were beaten. Of course, I know of cases where immediately the parent took the child away. Today, the situation is somewhat better. Well, for whatever reason, and because of these type of situations, that they were obviously aware. When this child was born, I was not yet in Chicago. My father was not here, so I don't know all the details from that time. But the parents decided at that point to keep the child at home. And of course, that made great difficulties for them. The father was not able to work. And they had trouble getting an apartment. And at the end, my father, Zatzal, together with a member of the community, went around collecting money in order to purchase an apartment for them. And this child just did not, it would just, as I mentioned, he wasn't capable of, certainly on an intellectual level, of learning anything. And the mother was someone who used to write articles from time to time about her experiences, of course, because of the situation she was in. It was limited what she could write. But I remember one article that she wrote. She wrote that before Pesach, as in most Jewish homes, before Pesach, you bring in all kinds of products. You put away the chametz. You bring the matzahs in. You bring the kosher Pesach products, and so there were many boxes in the house. And this child, even with his limited intelligence, whenever he would see the boxes, he would get excited. He knew that soon there's going to be the Seder. He wasn't able to talk, and he wouldn't understand what people told him. But communication was there. And sometimes, not just sometimes, communication is not limited to words. And it's interesting, the Torah uses two types of expressions. When it talks about Zikaron Yetzias Mitzrayim, the mitzvah of remembering the Exodus, of perpetuating the events of the Exodus, Torah uses Vamarta, and you shall say. And the Torah says V'higadata. And I mentioned the Malbim. I think the Malbim is so important. The Malbim says that V'higadata doesn't mean to say. It means to communicate. A person can talk and not communicate. And a person can communicate and not talk. And sometimes, when it comes to conveying Gan Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's important to understand the V'higadata, to convey. And there's so much in the Seder. I mention it always. We lean. The leaning is not something we say, but it's experience. We give over, not just with what we say. And sometimes when we say, we are not giving over. So, as a matter of fact, when you take a look at the end of the Haggadah, so you have the Echad Miyodeya. Who knows one? I know one. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God is one. Who knows two? I know two. Shnei Luchos HaBris, 2 tablets. The Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments. Who knows 3? Shlosha Avos. What does this have to do with Yetzias Mitzrayim? What does this have to do with the Exodus from Egypt? Why do we say it at the end of the Haggadah? But the reason, I think, is because part of the Haggadah is to emphasize the significance of chinuch. Yes, the mitzvah of Haggadah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is only Pesach at night. And according to many opinions, it's only until Chatzos, until midnight. But the impact of the Haggadah, the purpose of the Haggadah, does not come to an end at midnight, nor at dawn. It continues throughout the year. I think in Kabbalah they say that Pesach really never ends. The minhag of Lubavitch is that we don't, not to say Chasal Seder Pesach. Not to say Chasal Seder Pesach. Why? Because to a certain degree, To a certain degree, Pesach never ends. To a certain degree, Pesach never ends. So, from a certain perspective, well, it's not only because the other Yomim Tovim, in a sense, are a continuation of Pesach. Or the other regolim are perpetuation. There's Eichel Yetzias Mitzrayim also. But the impact of Pesach has to continue throughout all the days of the years. And this I think, is part of the idea also. Because the Pesach Haggadah, yes, it's a mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but it's more than a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. It emphasizes chinuch, and it's not just chinuch of the child. It's chinuch of the parent. And the chinuch of the parent, a parent has to learn how to be mechanech, how to educate, how to train, how to give over. And that varies from child to child. And very often that entails giving over things that's not in the Haggadah. Technically, we would have to write a different Haggadah for each child. And a different Haggadah for each child every year. But it became necessary to have a standard Haggadah. But somehow, when we say the standard Haggadah, we have to not forget the initial purpose of the Haggadah. Yes, it's to convey to children, but more than that, I shouldn't say more than that, but to a large degree, it's to convey to ourselves how to be mechanech. And I think that that's the idea when we say echad miyodeya. When we teach children, we use simonim, signs. When in the secular classes, when they want to teach the ABC, A is for apple, B is for boy. I forgot the whole ABC, what each one represents. Why? Because this is, in a sense, we have to enter the world of the child. In other words, Pesach, the Haggadah, there's a double perspective. One perspective is for us to enter the world of the child. And it doesn't have to be the child. It could be the adult. It could be for whoever we are talking to, for whomever we're trying to convey, for who we're trying to communicate with. And at the same time, we have to bring the child into our world. And depending on who the child is, and depending on who we are, the degree that we use one approach and the degree we use the other approach is different. And we encourage the child to ask questions. We make all kinds of differences. We move the kaira, the Seder plate. Why? Ein habayishan lomed. We're teaching the child that he should ask questions. And in a sense, as I've mentioned many times, that's part of freedom. Someone who's not free is scared to open their mouth. And if you're not able to ask questions, you're not free. And a child should be encouraged to ask questions. Shouldn't be considered a waste of time. I'll tell it to him. And I think what's also important in the Haggadah is to give the child chashivas, a sense of importance. And this is not limited, again, I repeat, this is not limited to Pesach. Pesach is not just training the child, it's training us. Now, it's very interesting. I've discussed in the past the two minhagim of pouring for the Arba Kosos. There are those that have the custom, that's the general custom, at least the way I saw it, is that each person would pour the wine in the Arba Kosos for the other person, the 4 cups for the other person. Why? Because that's a sign of freedom. It's a sign of malchus, of royalty. Royalty has people who serve him. And the Arba Kosos, the 4 cups, they represent Cheirus. They represent freedom. And I discussed the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that the 4 cups correspond with the 4 times kos paro biyadi in the discussion that went on between Yosef and the Sar Hamashkim. And the question is, the Arba Kosos correspond with the cup of Paro. And I mentioned 2 possibilities. One possibility is, in other words, in order for us to feel free, in order for us to feel that we are not servants of Paro or Paro's successors throughout the Jewish history, it's necessary for us, in a sense, to see us, that we rule over ourselves. The cup of Paro becomes our cup. And the other pshat I suggested was that no, we do not become in Paro's place. We become in place of the Sarhamashkin, of the butler. And when we pour the wine into the 4 cups, it's the cup of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I suggested that the question is, there are opinions that say that the cup, that the 4 cups of wine have to be drunk in certain points in the Haggadah. In other words, the main mitzvah is the recitation of the Haggadah over the cups. The recitation of the Haggadah over the cups make the cups of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We drink from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's cup because in recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu as Melech, when we recognize God as King, we become free of the other kings who rule over the Jewish people. And I want to explain, and so I explained that those who say the custom of Lubavitch, I wanted to suggest, I should say, because I didn't hear this, but the those who have the custom that each person pours his own cup, it's based on the fact that they see the cup as the cup of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's cup. And we are the butlers. We are the Sar Hamashkim, figuratively, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of God. And we, in a sense, thereby show that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our Melech. But I want to suggest, but the other opinion, that people pour for us, that each person pours for the next person. It's not just because because I should have someone pour for me, that I should feel freedom. I think it's to emphasize the point that when we experience freedom, when we celebrate the freedom of Pesach night, you should inform, communicate to your children that God did this for me, when I left Egypt. It's a personal experience. It's not enough to see that I'm free. I have to see that all the Jewish people are free. I have a responsibility not just to see that I am free, but to recognize and to communicate to the other Jewish people that they are free. It's not just our ancestors. El Afo Sanu Gali Mahem. It talks in the Lashon Rabbim. Us. It's not just me. It's all of us. So I have an obligation, and it's not just an obligation for me to see my friend, to see my fellow Jew as if he is free. That obligation manifests itself in letting him know that he's free, in communicating to him that he's free, in giving him that feeling of freedom. So it's not just for me to feel free by having someone else pour a cup of wine for me. But part of the idea is to give the other person that feeling of his being free. And I want to speak. In other words, and that's, in a sense, this is what Moshe Rabbeinu told Paro. It's not just us, but our children also. We have to make them feel as part of the group. And this is especially true when we deal with the handicap, and we deal with the mentally handicapped. My father would always say that the strength of a chain is dependent on the strength of the weakest link. And when we talk of us being free as a nation, and what's the idea of freedom, feeling free? What's the idea of feeling free? But part of the experience of feeling free is feeling that I have cheshivos, a certain degree of importance. Not to the point of gaiva. There's a difference between cheshivos and gaiva. When a person has gaiva, he's looking down at others. Then he becomes a paro. The Rambam, I always mention, the Rambam in the Igros says, Paro hu hayetzer hara. Paro is the yetzer hara. What is the idea that Paro is the yetzer hara? You know, at one time there was a discussion in the yeshiva world about learning Musar. And Musar, to a large degree, is learning character traits. But there were those that were opposed to it because they thought it took away from learning Torah, and they felt that the character traits could be learned from the learning of Torah, assuming it's taught in the proper manner, of course. And there were those that felt that their special emphasis had to be given, that when they very often a new tendency arose in learning Torah to ignore the impact that learning Torah had on a person's character. That when they learned Shoshanaga Chesapara, they were talking about oxen, and cows. They had nothing to do with them. So because of this, they had to give special emphasis on character traits. But I'm not discussing that point. But in a sense, we have to give people a sense of chashivos. And part of this Seder, those who have, especially those who have this custom of having other people pour the wine for them. It's not just that I should feel Cheirus for my. It's for me, who, if I pour the wine for somebody, to feel that it's my responsibility to give a sense of chashivos. We learn chashivos and this is the thing here. By Paro, we have to learn from Paro. Look at Paro. Paro was ready because of his bad character traits. He's the symbol of bad character traits. And in being the symbol of bad character traits, he looks down at everybody. And we have to learn from Paro. I once heard from, I mentioned it, from one of my Rabbi. I don't think it's shot in the pasuk, but the idea is very true. Boa Paro canich baretias libo. Go to Paro because I hardened his heart. What's the idea? Go to Paro to see how low a person could sink. Because you have to learn from Paro, not to be like Paro. Because those character traits that Paro had, you could also get. When we see people crumbling because of things that they did, that's a lesson in Musar. Sometimes it's a bigger lesson in Musar than learning the Sifrei Musar. Bo al Paro, kenihich partis libo, because I hardened his heart. Paro was at the top of the world, and everything crumbled. Why? Kina taiva v'kaval motzinas adam in olam. We see very often very rich people at the pinnacle of power, but in one moment, because of gaiva, kina taiva and kavod. Of course, you shouldn't look down at them. but you have to learn a lesson. And very often, Chazal tell us the Meraglim, they saw what happened when people talked in an improper manner. They saw what happened to Miriam. We should learn from Sota. Koloroa Sota b'kikulo. Yazir atzum in ayayin. A woman who acted immorally, who acted improperly. We have to learn from them not to commit the same mistake. It doesn't begin with the last step. It begins when they become addicted to wine. And there is a trend today in our community to become alcoholics. I go into shuls. I have to say, this is I see more in New York than I see it in Chicago. I go into shuls. People come dressed in bekishes, walking to shul with bottles, big bottles of liquor. Many of them coming in during Anim Cheirus. They don't come to shul even to daven, but they do wear their bekishes. They come to shul to drink liquor, to give a ritualistic, to give it a religious fervor. So we have to learn. We have to learn from Paro, not to become like Paro. And so, of course, we have to give chashivas. We have to feel chashiv. But chashivas cannot manifest itself in gaiva, in haughtiness, in considering ourselves superior. All Klal Yisrael went out of Egypt. All Klal Yisrael were endowed with Cheirus. And if we don't see that they have chashivas, then we don't have chashivas. So part of feeling chashiv Pesach night is for us to feel chashiv. But this presents a special challenge when you're dealing with the handicapped, when you're dealing with the poor. So part of Pesach night, we all, it's all of us. It's a holiday for everybody. And Cheirus is a holiday for everybody, but it's not to be limited to the holiday. The strength of Pesach has to go throughout the year. It goes throughout the year. To a certain degree, of course, orally we say Chasalsi the Pesach, most of us. But Pesach shouldn't come to an end. Cheirus is important all year round. Pesach is mechanech us how to be mechanech. It teaches us how to teach. And many years ago, when we moved into Chicago, that was in 1966. It took a short while for us to move into our house. That was probably already, we moved into the house, it was January or February of 1967. And a couple knocked on the door. They lived around the corner, actually a block and a half away. And they wanted to talk to my father. And afterwards, my father told me what they came. They said they had an uncle in Europe, a young boy who was a paraplegic. And being a paraplegic in those days in Europe, on the best of circumstances, couldn't do anything. And there was another young boy in the neighborhood that would come every day to play with that boy. And that boy, before the boy who played with him would come, would be thinking about what he's going to do when his friend comes and plays with him. And after the boy left, he would be thinking and talking about how he played with the other boy who came to see him. That became the center of his life. That gave meaning to him. And the boy who came to play with the paraplegic boy, the uncle of this couple that came to see my father, was Aaron Soloveichik. And they wanted to know whether my father was that Aaron Soloveichik. This was in Warsaw. And my father said, yes, he used to go play with that boy. And if I could use a word about my father, everybody who knew my father knew that my father was a man who certainly did not have a servile perspective to any other person, only to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When he saw something was wrong, he felt free to speak about it. Not he felt free. He felt compelled to speak about it. He was no slave. It became part of his personality. It was every day. And most of the time, more than once a day. When the man who had the two retarded children was told that he had to leave his apartment, and there were many influential people that were involved that were close to the one who tried to to throw him out of the apartment before he could find another apartment. So very few people spoke up on behalf of this person, on behalf of this person. And this person, the one who had the two retarded children, initially, up to that point, he never had contact with my father. He knew my father was there, but he had no contact with my father. And told, as he was told, talk to Rabbi Soloveichik. He'll help you out. Everybody was scared because there were people who had influence. But my father was free. And by the way, I'm not even finding fault with anybody, because that's the way things were. That's what it is. Everybody does that. But my father was different. And we have to learn from these type of people. We have to learn what's right. The people who are involved. That's the way of the world. But sometimes someone who's free has to liberate himself from the ways of the world. So we have to make people feel that they have chshivas. Very often there are people who feel they are helpless. We have to make them feel that they're part of the group. In the old days, today, there are a lot of institutions for handicap. Let me see what the name is. There are a lot of institutions for handicap, especially because there are government programs. In those days, it wasn't that way. And my father worked very hard to help start a day school for children in New York. It wasn't his day school. He wasn't connected with it in any way. But he would give them support. He would talk on their behalf. He would talk to people. But I think the first Jewish day school for handicapped children, I think it was in Far Rockaway. This was in the 60s. In other words, part of freedom, our general understanding of freedom, and again, I'm not finding fault with anybody. Our general understanding of freedom is that I am free. No, Pesach night, the lesson is that Klal Yisrael's free. And Klal Yisrael is not just the nation. The whole is equal to the sum of its parts. And that was my father. My father was concerned about the individuals. And the way we give them kshivos, in a sense, as I mentioned before, is not very often. It's very limited, the way we bring these people into our world. we have to go into their world. And sometimes by going into their world, so we are able to bring them out into our world to a limited degree. And now, when we deal with handicap, when we deal with the very young, when we deal with Chanoch Lenar al Pidarko, it's not just giving an intellectual study. This is Baruch HaMakom. What is Baruch HaMakom? God is the place of the world. What's the idea? God is place of the world. There are children, Ben Chacham, we can teach Torah. We can open up a Chumash. We can open up a Maseches Pesachim. We can open up a Gemara. We could perhaps even talk hashkafin philosophical terms. But there are children that we can teach intellectually. We have to tell them over stories, events that happened. Baruch HaMakom. Hu Mikamo Sha'olam. Tell them what took place, even if it's not learning from the Torah itself. But we can put it down as stories that happened, the history of the Jewish people. Of course, the ultimate source of the history of the Jewish people is the Torah, is the Masorah. In a sense, we have to convey the experience. And that's where a grandfather plays a big role. Because a grandfather of being from the former generation is closer to the experiences of the past than the father is. When a grandfather gives experience, and I say, Pesach, we talk about Maisa, Bereleza, Reb Taf, and Rabbi Akiva. What's the idea? The idea is, I think Pesach night, it's not just, it's a joining of the generations, the different Sedarim that took place throughout all generations are joined together. It's not just that we're at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, but we are together with the Jews of all the generations. And the grandfather, he has that sense. He represents that experience more so than the father. And not only that, and I think the reason for that is a child sees his father as part of his generation, even though it's a different generation. But a grandfather they see as representing the past. And part of the idea of Masorah is not just that we give over. The word Masorah is to give over, but it's really much more than what the word conveys. It's linkage. It's linkage and in a sense, it gives us a perspective. When you have the father and the grandfather together, there is this sense of linkage to the past. The idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim, Zikaron Yetzias Mitzrayim, is not just to hear stories about the past, in a sense, and to experience the past, but it's to have linkage with the past. And it's very interesting. The Rambam says in Parshas Bo that Kiddush HaChodesh, regarding Kiddush HaChodesh, in Bo we learn about Kiddush HaChodesh, that the Kiddush HaChodesh, in order to do Kiddush HaChodesh, you need Bezdin HaGadol to be in existence. Only a Bezdin that is authorized by the High Court of Israel is able to give the other Batei Dinim the license to declare the new month on the basing of the sighting of the moon. And when there is no Bezdin HaGadol, so then the calendar goes into effect. And the question is, the Bezdin HaGadol came to an end, certainly in the Lishkas HaGazis, at the time the Ramban asked that question, came to an end at the time of the Churban, at the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And even outside the Beis HaMikdash, after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, it came to an end around the time of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, after Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi passed away. It might have existed for a short while afterwards. But we know they were Mekadesh Chadashim, they proclaimed the new month, not on the basis of the calendar, but on the basis of the Kiddush HaChodesh, the basis of on the basis of the sighting of the new moon of the Bezdin, proclaiming when there was no Bezdin HaGadol. So who acted on behalf of Bezdin HaGadol until the smicha came to an end, until the time of Abaye and Rav, as the Rambam says? And my uncle writes that it was the Chachmei HaMasorah. The Gemara, the Rambam and the Hagdama lists the 40 generations. The 40 generations from Moshe Rabbeinu to Ravina and Ravashi until the completion of the Gemara. That represents the period of the Chachmei HaMasorah. Question is, why should the Chachmei HaMasorah represent the Jewish people? Why? But I think when we speak about Bezdin HaGadol, the High Court of Israel, the High Court of Israel represents the Jews, not just the Jews of this generation, but the Jews of all generations. And the Chachmei HaMasorah, it's not just that they give over from one generation to the other generation, but it's a linkage of the generations. Consequently, the Chachmei HaMasorah represent the Jews of all generations. So the idea of Pesach, the idea that we have to have a linkage of all generations. But today, we do not have the Chachmei HaMasorah. So because of that, the calendar goes into effect according to the Rambam, Halacha Moshe Misinai. The idea of Pesach is the idea of linkage of the generations. We don't have the linkage of the generations in terms of the Chachamim, but we have the linkage of the generations in terms of the individual Jews. And when you have the father and the grandfather there, the child who might not be intellectually, does not have intellectual understanding, understands the concept of the linkage of the generation. His grandfather represents the past, his father and him. There is a linkage, there is a connection, there is a connection between the generations. And this is the idea, I think, Pesach represents the idea of the linkage of the generations. A few years ago, I spoke in a program in Muncie to the parents, to a group, children that were handicapped, mentally handicapped, and they were making a siyum. And to a large degree, most of the children, they made a siyum on Masechta Mishnayos. And to a large degree, they learned the Mishnayos I don't know how much each one retained. And I was explaining to the parents the idea behind this siyum is not so much the knowledge, the intellectual knowledge they obtained, but the children see themselves as not as part of the Masorah. When we have children that are limited, I have handicapped children, so I can speak as a parent. It's important for them to feel that they're part of the group, but not just part of the group of the family, not just part of the group of Klal Yisrael is now, but they have to see themselves as part of the Masorah. And this is the idea behind the Haggadah of Pesach. The children and those who are limited in some degree or another, they feel themselves as part of the Masorah. They feel themselves as part of the group. They see themselves as part of Klal Yisrael, and they see themselves as part of the family, not just something added to the family. This is what Cheirus is all about. Pesach night, we have to dedicate ourselves, not just to seeing ourselves as Ben Chorin, but to see everybody, all Jews, as Ben Chorin. And we have to use that experience of Pesach night to motivate us throughout all the days of the year.
Okay, so anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. I have a lot of questions.
Sure.
So your father wrote that there used to be a school of education that there not a literal school, but they felt they should take the kids to Sing Sing to see the prisoners and see how don't be like that. And he was very critical of it.
Yes,
So
that's
that
true.
would not be the pshat that you mentioned, the Boa Paro, to see how low you could
No,
go.
no, 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 no. I don't think that the Baal Paro means what the Torah emphasizes. In other words, the Torah emphasizes you don't.
Well, we
But
went to Paro because it was a specific
when
bad
you
Mita,
see
whereas these.
when you are aware, not that you take the person to see particular people, because actually sometimes that gives you a negative attitude towards people in general. You're not talking about a particular person when you take them to Sing Sing. You're
Mhm.
talking about people in general. You present them as people in general.
Also, just I put a link in your father's book, Logic of the Heart, Logic of the Mind, is on a website called Ala Torah. So I
Yeah.
put the link in the chat where he talks about special education, the third part of the fire of Sinai
Right,
and
right.
the Rabbi Preda. So I put that link in for
Okay.
everyone.
Yeah.
Um, Someone from a couple generations ago, an important person, it was a wealthy person, but he used to deliver. I heard this straight from him. He would deliver moschitim boxes to people before Pesach, and he dropped on off at someone's house, and they got a call. I need you to come over. He said. He goes in there. There's two chairs, a table, and that's it. And the person said, "There's been a mistake. I got this box. I don't need it. Please take it back." And he gave him $1. He said, "Give it to someone who needs it more than me." So I think uh, that the part of we have to know how the other Jews lived. There was who
Oh,
was it?
100%.
Someone in Gemara, was it in Gemara Brachos, that someone the Nasi didn't know that Reish
Yeah,
Lakish
yeah,
used to,
yeah,
I mean
yeah,
Rabbi
yeah,
Yochanan, why is
yeah,
your
yeah,
face
yeah.
black?
That's right.
And he
That's right.
criticized the
That's
leader
right.
for not knowing how the
That's
generation
right.
lived.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so we
yeah.
have to know. You
Well,
said
that's
we
when Rebbe Lesser Ben Azai was appointed Nasi because of that. Yeah, that was Rabbi Yeshua with Rabbi Yeshua's house that was dark, black, the ceiling.
right because you didn't know that he was a
Yeah,
blacksmith.
that's right.
So you mentioned that we have to not bring people to try to bring them into where we are. We have to go to where they are. So it's not
Yeah,
just figurative, but there's also
that's
a
right.
literal part. We have to know how they are.
That's right. That's the idea about that why did Pelagish Begiva take place? So it says because the members of Sanhedrin Instead of going one day to Tzipore, one day to Tveria, one day to Kedei Lamed Yisrael Torah v'derech eretz. Derech eretz there means how they earn a living, what's their economic status. They sat in their place in Yerushalayim, underneath their vine, and the attitude was, let the people come to me. That's why Pelegish Begiva took place. The Yalkut Shimoni says that.
Yeah, I think it's also in the Tanad Velio.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay, and then another question. Um, Certain people, let's say, who were Talmidim of your father when your father was very young, and they learned tremendous amount from him, and they say that he knew everything and this and that, versus someone like me who I learned from him when I was very young and he was very old. Is there a difference from the idea of a grandfather? Is there a difference of when the grandfather, when he's a young grandfather, or the old grandfather? Is there a difference in? Do you understand what I'm trying to ask? Like meet Talmidim of your father from different generations, or Lahavdil. Rabbi Yochanan was a Talmud of Rabbeinu Agadol when he was very old, and Rav was a Talmud when he was younger.
Obviously, it more represents. But I think in my father's situation, the two reasons. When you learned with my father, Reb Chaim was not just the Sefer. My father would say, "This is how I heard it over from my father." You were learning. It was a real Masorah. It was a real Masorah. That's one thing. But it's true what you're saying. But I'm just saying that even the previous generations, with my father, even though my grandfather wasn't there, Reb Chaim wasn't there, but they were there to a certain degree. Obviously, somewhat different, but they were there, and so that's also it was. That generation was a different generation because that was the European generation coming over to America, and my father was sort of like part of both the European community and the American community.
Yeah, someone else is saying, and then they said that you're actually saying this right now. The greatest learning from someone is the experience from learning from their actions, and not
Yeah,
just from what they're doing.
that's correct. That's correct.
But I'm just asking.
By the way, that's the mitzvah according to the Meshech. My father used to repeat it. The mitzvah of chinuch, according to Meshech, Yidativ, Hakadosh Baruch Hu says, "Laman ashi yitzava as bana v'es beiso achrav v'shamru derech Hashem lasot staka mishpat." So that's the pasuk the Meshech Chochmah says, or that's a pasuk that tells us about the mitzvah of chinuch. And my father used to add that achrav means by his example. Laman ashi yitzava as bana v'es beiso achrav. After him by his example.
Yeah, but what Rebbe said is very true. That it didn't matter what age your father was,
Yeah,
or even your uncle. That Rav Avram
that's right.
Shapiro later was the chief rabbi. He said that Rav Kook said when your uncle went in 1934, whatever, to Eretz Yisrael, it was Reb Chaim speaking through
Medaber
his
mitol
throat.
chrono.
So even though he was extremely young, there definitely was a linkage of the generations.
That's
But
right.
I'm saying for the idea though of grandfather, is there psychologically as a
There
Talmud
is, there
a
is. There's
difference between
certain,
learning from the
there's
same
certain,
rabbi when he's very young versus when he's
there
old?
certainly is. I should add. Well, I don't know. Maybe not. There certainly is. There certainly is. It certainly is. I'll tell you. I have to go. Someone's at the door here, so okay,
Okay.
we'll have to end it over here.
This is my last question. I mean, you're not going to answer, but just so you know what I was thinking, in last week's parsha, the Vayikdu Am Vayishtachavu
Yeah.
al Habanim, and you spoke about this like maybe 20 years ago in
That's
regard
right.
to
Even the Ben Russia. Yeah.
and the special education
Yeah.
needs children also.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Alabama. That's right. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I saw something interesting over Shabbos from 50 years ago I have to tell you about, but related to that
Okay. Another
also.
time. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.